Recently, the Palm Springs Kiwanis Club had another great speaker. Let's listen in.
I see this as the beginning of other relationships, especially with the younger people here. This man will have one of these fancy name tags, and or like his with all the things. You'll have a wall one day, but with time, because it's all about relationships. And wherever I've gone, it's been about building intimate relationships with as many people as possible. My background, my professional background, believe it or not, in Jewish life was an educator, informal educator. In the mid-'80s, I was working in Ojai in the summers at Camp Ramah. And I had grown up at that camp. It's a conservative movement camp, Jewish camp. And that's where I got a very strong Jewish identity, and also my love of Israel came from those summers. And after, I'll go through my life in a second, but in the 80s, we had just 3 daughters at the time, my wife Sasha and I. We wanted to give them experience. We couldn't afford anything. We were making bubkas. We were making nothing. You can tell them after what bubkas means, okay? We were making pennies. But my parents would fly us from Israel via Amsterdam, where my wife's family lives, so they could see their 3 granddaughters, to LA, and then we would work for two months in the summer at this summer camp. My wife worked with special education, and I ran the educational program. And when I started to work outside, especially, and to do activities, and there's no microphones, you learn the very simple rule: minimum distance to maximum amount of people. Minimum distance to maximum amount of people. And so, for instance, I learned that when I'm setting up a room for a service, this is great, but instead of going for the length of it and being down like auditorium style, let's turn it on the side and be over here so I can be far more, because it's about the intimacy, it's about the relationship. That's why I have never really done well on TV, because it's not intimate, especially the ones where you're looking at cameras. I don't know what to do. I need to feel the pulse of people. Now, are there medical people here? There's a term that I saw it in Israel, I'm sure it exists here as well. I have no idea what it means, but I used it I steal things. It's called biofeedback. I have no idea what that means in a hospital. I'm sure it has something to do, but it's some sort of way of therapy. But biofeedback for me is that I see the living people. If they're sleeping, that's bad biofeedback, right? If they're up and they're engaged, you have your smile to engage in people's eyes. That works. And so, if you have a small group, it's easier. A bigger group, but when you have a big space, or when you're on film and there people are looking at cameras on a screen, that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So I'm happy to be in a small group. I was born in Burbank, California, St. Joseph's Hospital, or as my father used to like to joke when I was a kid, well, we've actually picked you up at the cartoon place across the street, I don't know if it was Walt Disney, whoever was making cartoons across the street. And I grew up in Sherman Oaks, in the San Fernando Valley. I grew up in a family very committed to Jewish life, but liberal. In other words, an egalitarian approach, where women counted in the synagogue as much as men. In the synagogue that I went to in North Hollywood was like that. So that's what I grew up with. My brother is 3 years older than I am. And I'm 59, so my brother's 62. He was at the cusp of the 60s, and on Yom Kippur, which you may know is the holiest day of the year, where we spend the entire day just about in the synagogue. Maybe we had a break to come home for an hour or two. People fast for 25 hours. Well, my brother, when I was 12, he was 15, he said, I'm not going to synagogue. I'm staying at home. And so that kind of, my parents, they weren't so happy about that. There were issues of getting haircuts. There were all sorts of regular issues of whatever it was in 1968. And we get back from synagogue, my brother's gone. He leaves a note. He's 15 years old. He leaves a note, I need a break. I need to find myself. And he's gone for 2 weeks before he contacts my parents. My father went with his buddy, a private eye, up to, you'll understand in a second why I'm telling you the story, went up to Big Sur to look for him, Haight-Ashbury. This is the late 60s. He finally calls 2 weeks later from Tacoma, Washington, where he had hitchhiked. In 3 days he went up there, and in that period of time he did probably every drug possible and every experience possible as a 15-year-old. So he was a hippie. And if you meet him, sometimes he comes to visit me, you don't see that kind of long hair here, but he's got hair like even today. He's got long hair, he wears tie-dyed shirts, he's still a hippie. Okay? He was a hippie. Why am I telling you that? Because his rebellion was to be a hippie. I had to find my own rebellion. So I rebelled against my parents by becoming an Orthodox Jew. My parents were conservative, were liberal Jews. I became an Orthodox Jew, and I went away to Israel in 10th grade. I forgot how it came about, but my parents were happy. I think they wanted to keep me away from drug culture in any case. You know, it's the early 70s. And I come back from Israel, 10th grade, with, you know what payas are? Side locks? I was Hasidic, and I had a black hat, and I had the strings coming out of my thing, and I wouldn't touch women. You know, you can't touch women. And so I broke off my relationship with all the kids that I grew up with at public school that I'd gone to, at Camp Vermont, and I went on a journey through Orthodox Judaism, which brought me to Israel as right after high school, where I was 18 years old. So people said, well, what are you going to do in Israel? I said, well, first I'm going to study in yeshiva, a rabbinical seminary, not to become a rabbi, but to get a good education, Talmud, Jewish literature, and then I'm going to be a farmer. What do you mean going to be a farmer? I want to be a farmer. My parents said, you're not going to go to college? I said, what do I need college for? Well, you could go to UC Davis and learn viticulture. You know, there's things you could learn up there. I said, do you want me to apply? I'll apply. If you pay the fee to apply, whatever it was, $75, I'll apply. And I actually did get in. But I didn't go to college. I went to yeshiva. I bought a one-way ticket because I'm never coming back, but I'm not coming back in the first year or so. One-way ticket. I go to Israel, and I had already been there for the year, so I spoke fluent Hebrew, and I knew I wanted to live there, and I joined a program of study and army service for 5 years. I was in the tank corps, I was in the army. We went back and forth between the rabbinical seminary, and during those 5 years, I was able to grow intellectually, but in an Orthodox way. I was able to become a good soldier. I was actually a very good soldier, not an officer, a soldier. In the tank corps, I was a gunner in a tank. Fast forward, because I did 20 years of army service. We continue in Israel to do reserve duty from a month to 6 weeks every year. Thank God I never ever had to shoot a weapon at any other human being. I shot at a lot of targets. I shot at a lot of tanks, old tanks and trucks on the hillside, and blew them up and things like that, but I never ever shot at everything. And I actually thank God for that. I was ready, I was trained, but I didn't have to do it. That's kind of the best of both worlds. Israel is a country that's under fire. It still is in many ways, you know that. There's a lot of different political issues, and I won't go into that because part of my job here is to remain above that, because I've got congregants who are to the right wing politically, to the left wing politically, whether it's the United States or whether it's Israel. But those were difficult years because I was there on my own. Everybody else had a mother and a father to go, family to go to when you get off every 3 weeks. We only got off every 3 weeks, go home for the weekend, for the Sabbath. So the first half year I was in the army, I knew some people. It wasn't very comfortable. They had a crying baby. But and then we went back to the yeshiva. The second half, somebody says, "What about?" They used to call me David, because that's a Hebrew way of saying. The Hebrew is David, but they call me David because I was American. David's got no place to go, so they all started to have me over, and all their mothers started to send me packages. So at the end, and because I was a good soldier, they were letting me out on leave all the time. So I had a good time, but I felt that I was serving my nation, but what I really wanted to do was to work the land. Part of the Zionist ethos is not only to find a place for Jews to live and not be persecuted, certainly after the Holocaust, the Shoah, that was important, but it was beyond that. It was to build a culture, a Jewish culture in Hebrew. That's dance, theater, music, radio, whatever, TV, in Hebrew. And that's just like every other nation. And it was to work the land. And that's almost a religious thing. You know, farmers here have a relationship to land. I envision it maybe if there are Native Americans, if there are tribes, people who are still working the land. I'm doubting that that's the case. But if they work the land, they have a connection with the land which goes back hundreds of years. Most Americans don't have that kind of connection. Well, Israelis that came back, even though they didn't live there, because they were in Europe or in lands around the Middle East, they still had in their mind this idea of the land, the holiness of the land, from biblical times. And that's what I felt like. I was a kid. I felt like we were redeeming the land, making the desert grow. So what did I do? I finished my 5 years of army service together with the study, that program. And what did I do? I became a farmer. Went down to the Gaza Strip. 1980, different world in those days. It wasn't so much a political statement, but that's where you could get on the ground, the ground floor of a new settlement. And absolutely legal, was nothing illegal about it. Went down, we were 5 couples, 3 children, one of the couples had 3 children. And we were 3 bachelors. And the bachelors knew that they had to get married within the first year and a half or 2, within the first year, or we couldn't become members of the co-op. So of course, what did I do? But before that though, I'm a yeshiva boy. We don't go out. You don't go out on a date. And if you go on a date, you're sitting in a hotel lobby because you can't be in the same room closed off. You certainly can't touch. No fooling around, no hooking up, as the kids would say. No, it's all intellectual. There was a woman I knew. I'd met her at my friend's, her cousin's house. And she was from Holland. She was adorable. I never spoke to her before, but she's kind of hot. Right? So I arranged for her aunt said that she's going to go up to volunteer on a kibbutz in the north of the country. I said, they don't need volunteers. We're starting a new agricultural settlement in the Gaza Strip. Let her come to the Gaza Strip. So I arranged for her to come down, and everybody assumes that if David arranged for this woman, Sasha, to come down, they must be going out. And we never had a conversation before. But they just assume. So suddenly we find on the work detail every morning, these 3 people go over here, these 2 people go pick this, plant this. David and Sasha are always by themselves, someplace doing something. So we got to know each other. So we got married. And everybody expected us to get married. So we got married a year later. Well, that was 35 years ago, and we're very, very happily married. And I dragged her through the Gaza Strip. She was Orthodox at the time, I was Orthodox. But since then I've been on quite a journey from the Orthodox world to the liberal world, progressive world. Not only, and I'm not going to talk about, but not only politically, and that's part of it, but socially. And that's a lot of what some of the things that perhaps you see online. I didn't go to college till I was 25. We were in the Gaza Strip for 2 years. My wife was making a huge sacrifice by traveling back and forth. We only saw each other once a week the first year of marriage, only on the weekends because she was in nursing school in Jerusalem. Said, okay, it wasn't working out the way we thought. Let's go to Jerusalem for the year. I will dabble at academic study because my parents said, when you knew, maybe you go to college, maybe you go to college. I'm 25 years old. We have 1 child and 1 on the way because we were Orthodox and we didn't use birth control. We had 3 kids within 3.5 years. And started Hebrew University for what was going to be 1 year in the Bible department. And that 1 year turned into 15 years of academic study because I loved it so much. And while I was there, and I always thought, I want to be, I'm not going to be a farmer. What do I want to be? I didn't want to make money. I never had the inkling to make money, which I'm going to pay for, I'm sure, in a few years from now. Talk about, what I said, I have a passion for biblical literature. I want to be a professor of biblical literature at Hebrew University. And if you talk about, let's say, where's the place to learn certain sciences, UCLA, certain things are Berkeley, certain things are Harvard, the place in the world where biblical studies, I'm talking about Hebrew Bible, not the New Testament, although there's New Testament as well, but not as much. The pinnacle is Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I said, I want to be a professor of biblical study. And boy, did I not have what that took. Both my intellect, I know my stuff, but I'm not that sharp. My writing ability, it takes me forever to turn out an article. And the elbows, the competition. Any of you academics, have you ever been in the it's cutthroat, it's ruthless. It's worse than the restaurant business. It's this elbowing and always this and maneuvering and died. And I don't like contact. I don't like sports of any kind. I'm not attracted to them. That's my rebellion against my father, who loved baseball, basketball, a blessed memory. But the competition, it doesn't do anything for me. It makes me very uncomfortable. So instead I went into Jewish education, and that led to me becoming a rabbi. I had no intentions to be a rabbi. Even when I was ordained as a rabbi, I had no intentions to be a congregational rabbi. I'm an educator. I work with kids, I work with adults, I work with tots, and I made it my business to study early childhood educational theory. I opened up a preschool at my first synagogue, and I really saw that as my path. But something happened. When I started to staff this early childhood center in 91, I knew a man who was a nursery school teacher, who was one of our daughter's nursery school teacher, who was fantastic. And I don't know how it is out here, but in Israel, there were no males that did that. That was woman's work. Right? You never see a guy teaching early childhood, preschool, that kind of stuff. And so I knew this guy, Patrick, a French Jew who moved to Israel, and I went over to his place. I said, can I steal you from this institution where our daughter went to school to my newfound thing? And he laughs. He says, no, I'm moving down to Tel Aviv. I was living in Jerusalem, moving down to Tel Aviv. And he said in such a way as if I understood that there was something I didn't get. And what I didn't get was that he was gay, because none of us talked about that stuff then. In Israel, even here, well, Palm Springs is a different story, but I don't know where everybody's from, but this is the early 90s in Jerusalem. People didn't talk about it. But where did they talk about it, and where were people open? In Tel Aviv. So I'm moving down to Tel Aviv. Little did I know, because that's where gay men were moving. You want to be out, you've got to live in Tel Aviv. Women, less of a problem. Men is a strong, in many cultures. And so Patrick moves down to Tel Aviv, and that kind of red light in my mind. And then I said, okay, did the preschool. We did it for 2 years. 2 years later, I'm the rabbi, and I see on the front page of Yediot Achronot, that's the Sun, right? The Daily Sun, the LA Times of Israel. It says, teacher, first grade teacher, banned from the classroom and sent to the office of the Ministry of Education because he came out as HIV positive. This is Patrick Levy. Patrick Levy was the first person in Israel to be public about him being HIV positive. Fast forward, he's alive today. He's healthy. I just heard from him on my birthday over the weekend. We're very good friends. And I called Patrick. I said, hey, and we didn't know what it was then. You read about it in Newsweek and Time, what was happening in America. It didn't feel like it was an Israeli issue, but little did I know, people were already dying. Soon after everywhere else. It's Israel. People travel from the 80s onwards. This is 92, 93. I said, Patrick, what can I do to help? He says, we've got a conference. People who are HIV positive, people who are sick with AIDS, we have a conference in Jerusalem, and we need people to help us man the rest area, so people could have a infusion, or they could take a rest and get some water. People give them something, whatever they need. Can you round up a few rabbis to do that? I said, damn straight. And I was surprised. People did it. They all got it. They said, oh, we can do this. And I was afraid, because in Israel still people didn't know what's going to happen. Well, that began my career with not only working with people with HIV/AIDS, but as a chaplain. In rabbinical school, I had no training. I had 1 hour with a chaplain from America who was visiting. Israelis don't know, now they do, but at the time didn't know from chaplains in the hospitals or in the police department, the army. There are rabbis in the hospitals and police department, in the army, who are there to make sure that the food is kosher. They're there to make sure that the rules of the Sabbath are observed. But they have nothing to do with that. They don't talk to people who are dying, who are sick, the kind of things that all the pastoral care. I just didn't have it. I made sure that changed 10 years later with an organization to bring that into the education of rabbis in Israel. But at the time it didn't exist, so I had to make this stuff up. I didn't know. I never sat with anybody dying, let alone somebody who was dead. I walked in, and these are some of the lessons that I learned. There are you ever seen the straps that some of us put on in the morning? Tefillin, they're called tefillin. They're phylacteries. They put here and you put here. It's the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy says, you shall bind them for a sign on your arm and between your eyes. And it's something that religious, observant Jews do in the morning. I went to one guy. He was an Orthodox guy with a little kippah like mine, little one, and he was dying of AIDS. And I went in. I said, would you like me, I was in the hospice, would you like me to, we have an AIDS hospice then, would you like me to wrap the tefillin with you because you're too weak? And he goes, and he had a cigarette. They were allowed to smoke in their rooms and in beds. Yeah, what are you going to tell somebody who's dying of AIDS? Don't smoke? Really? So I can see it so clear. His name is Eli. He takes a whatever, what do you call it? Shluk, a swig, puff. He goes, a drag. He goes, nods his head. He goes, you know what? He doesn't deserve it. Meaning God. That's a commandment you do for God. God doesn't deserve it. I was with a rabbinical student from LA, from the University of Judaism, who was with me. She came out. She said, "It's so tragic. He would speak that way. God doesn't deserve it." I said, "No, that's so fantastic. At least he has a God to be angry at." Most Israelis and those that had HIV/AIDS, especially from the gay community, they had no religious background. What they had, they rebelled against it, and they didn't have prayer. Now, I'm not saying prayer is for everybody, but there is a certain comfort in prayer. At least he had somebody to be angry at. that wasn't his mother or his father or the partner that got him sick, whatever it was. He had something. To me, that was an important lesson. Another important lesson I come in once, and there's a very emaciated, a very, very thin woman with bone, look like pictures out of the Holocaust. She's sitting in a wheelchair, and on both sides of her parents, you could see her father has a big black kippah, dark complexion, turns out they were from Afghanistan, Afghani Jews, mother with a kerchief over her hair, very observant, and they're both kind of stroking their daughter's arms on both sides. It was very, very touching to see, and she's got an infusion, and you could see she doesn't have much more time to live. And so they said, will you give our daughter a blessing? Now, there are rabbis that do that. At the time, I didn't do that. I didn't put my hands on the head. I came from an intellectual background. You don't do that. But I realized this is what they need from me right now. They need me to be this kind of a rabbi. So then I said, but you know what else we do? We pray for the sick in our synagogue on the Sabbath. Let me get your name. Let me go to the nurse's station and get a pen to write down. It's not just you don't use the regular name, you use the religious name. So I'm David, son of Reuben. And so you see, I wanted to write it down. Well, the brother was there watching this from the side. He comes over to the station with me. He says, Kvod Harav, it's your honorable rabbi. It's a very, very, very formal. He says, you need to know, her name was Ruth. Before Ruth was born, Joseph. And I hadn't been exposed to this stuff before, and I think to myself, oh my God, here's this couple, these parents who are watching their child die, and this is the culmination of everything they've gone through in the traditional society. Think Down Valley, Hispanic, Catholic families, you've been exposed, and their experience. It's not that they're wrong or right, it's just that the distance between those worlds and the world that we live in here in Palm Springs, not just with gay men, but with transgenderism and all sorts of queer kinds of issues. I say queer in the academic sense, of non-straight kinds of things. That was so fun. I said, wow, look at these parents, how devoted they are to their child. They were able to get past all the nonsense. All the boomamices, all the bullshit. They got past it. Those were important lessons for me. But what that did, working with the HIV community, and I had a congregation in Jerusalem, and I had to find time to come down once a week to do this. I was very proud of my work. It wasn't easy to do, but nobody else would do it. I was there because there was nobody else, and they asked me. So people would say at the time, oh, do you have a brother who's died of AIDS or something? Or do you have no, not an uncle, nothing. No personal, this was the right thing to do. But with time, I got more and more involved with that organization, the Israel AIDS Task Force, and naturally, who was on the board of directors? Lots of gay men and lots of lesbian women, as was the same case here. Before the AIDS epidemic, or before those rough years, very often gay men and lesbian women would be more apart. They came together. Well, that's what happened in Israel as well. And that's how I came into contact with the gay community in Israel. We're not only questioners, we're arguers. We argue about everything, and we have, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. People often say that. That is exactly our culture, and it starts already in the Bible. It starts in the Torah. There's 2 versions of the creation story. They're very different. Chapter 1, chapter 2. There's 2 versions of the Song of the Sea. There's the prose and there's a lot of things that were brought together, and the same thing in the Christian tradition, in the older Christians, in the Gospels as well. You've got 4 different versions of Jesus' life here on earth. They're different. Not one is right. They're all right somehow. That's pluralism. And that's a little bit of a struggle we have with Islam. And I don't demean Islam in any way, but Islam is different than Christianity and Judaism in that there is one Quran. All of the copies of the Quran are exactly identical. There's no textual variations, and they're always looking for what is the only tradition. We say there's not one tradition, there's many traditions. We have survived as long as we have by different behaviors, by eating differently, dressing differently, and I think that brings. Then there's anti-Semitism, which is based on part of the early church thought, right? The Jews killed Christ, and therefore that wasn't changed in the Catholic Church in the 1960s. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
For more, go to KIWANIS PALM SPRINGS.org.